What if I told you one of the biggest myths about VA loans is costing veterans hundreds of thousands of dollars in buying power, and most don't even know it's a lie? I've heard it over and over again. I can't use a VA loan because the house is over $1 million, or I don't have 20% to put down. The rules changed years ago, but a lot of people are still making decisions based on outdated information. Today we're talking about fact from fiction, explaining what actually changed, and share the story of a veteran who almost tied up hundreds of thousands of dollars unnecessarily because he believed this myth. We have a lot to talk about. Let's just get into it.
Sure. Well, let's start with the biggest myth then. How about that? A lot of veterans still believe that VA loans have a maximum purchase price amount. Where do you think that misconception came from?
Well, for years, it actually did have a maximum purchase price. I mean, not so much a maximum purchase price, but a maximum loan amount tied to a purchase price. Like you could go over a certain amount, but that rule changed in 2020. It took in effect. And it was, let me get this right, Blue Water Navy Vietnam Veterans Act of 2019, taking effect 2020. It eliminated a maximum purchase price, maximum loan amount for a VA loan.
So it's been a minute since that actually was in effect.
Right. And this goes to show that, sometimes myths are based on facts of the past, but, people think they're true for years.
And why do you think so many people don't know about that?
I don't know. There's still loan officers out there and lending companies within those, loan officers that work at different lending companies that don't even know that there's not a maximum purchase price. So who you work with does matter, but there's still people out there that believe it because it's just an old truth. Yeah. It's not true anymore.
Well, when they say that there's no VA loan limits anymore, who qualifies for that? And are there any exceptions to that?
Okay, so there are no more VA loan limits. Okay, so you can if you want to buy $1 million home, it's possible, but you still have to qualify. So you can, if you have your entitlement, so if you're a veteran with entitlement, you're eligible, but you still have to qualify for the loan. So really what's going to prevent you from getting a VA loan of a certain size is going to be your own qualifications and limitations. But assuming you qualify, there is no maximum VA loan amount.
So when you're talking to that lender that specializes in VA loans, what specifically are they looking at?
They're going to look at your income. They're going to look at your debts. They're going to look at the make sure you have enough assets to cover the closing costs if you're paying your own closing costs. So they're going to look at your qualifications based on how much money you make, how much money you have in monthly debt obligations that would show up on a credit report, if you have any child care expenses, and they're going to make sure that what's left over meets the guidelines.
Gotcha. So we recently had a veteran that came to us, and he was under the misconception that he had to put 20% down, but he also wanted to do some home renovations. Do you remember that client?
I do, specifically.
Can you walk us through what happened with him?
Well, he came to us wanting to buy $1 million home. I think the house was like $1.2 million. And he was thinking he had to put 20% down. And that was a little bit of a stretch for him. He could make it happen, but after closing, there were some things he wanted to do to the house, some renovations he wanted to make to the house. So one of our loan officers worked with them and let him know, hey, listen, you qualify. He was a veteran. He qualified for VA financing. Yeah. He's used his VA before, so he was familiar with it. But he still thought because he was buying a VA loan of buying a house with a VA loan of $1.2 million, that he would have to put a bigger down payment because that was the guidelines of past and probably what he was told in the past, right? Mm-hmm. So when the rules changed, we were able to get him. He didn't want to put 0% down. He ended up putting 5% down. So he ended up saving a lot of money to be able to use towards those renovations later, and he still qualified, and he was super pumped.
So mentioning that 5% down, why did that specifically make sense for him?
In this instance, and in instances, if you put 5% down, your funding fee is decreased. And right now, it does change sometimes over time, but it's been this for a hot minute, that your funding fee goes from, for subsequent use, in other words, you've used your VA benefits before for the purchase of a home, the subsequent use is 3.3% of the loan amount is the funding fee. If you put 5% down, that goes to 1.5%. So he saved money on the funding fee, put a little down so his payment's a little lower, and it just made a lot of sense for that individual.
Do you find that most veterans don't really realize that they have these options?
Yes, especially ones that have used it in the past because they were told, oh, you can only go up to a certain amount in the past, and that's no longer the case. And, I don't know as a lending community that we do the best job, and that's why we're here is to try to educate people to let them know what the options out there for them.
Or they think it's kind of like an all or nothing type of conversation.
Right, yeah.
So for someone thinking about buying in today's market, what's the biggest mistake that veterans make before they talk to a lender?
It's assuming that they know, right? I mean, there's a lot of misinformation out there. They might search the internet and find old guidelines. Talk to a professional. Talk to a local that is an expert in the VA loan territory and to find out what's possible. Because sometimes we make up these things in our head like, oh, I can't do this because this limiting belief of what happened in the past. In the reality, sometimes an expert will help you find that pathway and do things. With the VA loan, the seller can pay closing costs on behalf of the veteran. The seller can actually pay debt for the veteran to allow them to qualify. And a lot of these things they don't think of and don't know. That's why you talk to an expert.
Exactly. So if you know an expert locally that specializes in VA loans,
we happen to be that expert.
We happen to be that
expert. We do loans in Florida, and we'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, that's all I have for you today.
I think today's conversation is a perfect reminder that mortgage guidelines change, but unfortunately, myths tend to stick around much longer. So if you're a veteran and you've been assuming a VA loan won't work for your situation, especially if you're looking at higher priced homes, it may be worth having a conversation before ruling yourself out. And if you found this episode helpful, be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with another veteran or military family. You never know who might be making decisions based on outdated information.